You may imagine yourself waking in the early light of Sparta, a city unlike any other in ancient Greece. The sun has not yet risen high over the rugged mountains, but the air is already alive with sound. Roosters crow in the distance, and the faint clatter of bronze can be heard from the training fields where young men prepare for another day of disciplining. In the simple houses of Sparta, women stir, beginning their own day with a rhythm that has been shaped by custom and duty for centuries. A Spartan woman's home was not a place of luxury. The rooms were plain, built of stone and wood, the furniture sparse. Life here was not about comfort or decoration. It was about endurance, strength, and order. Yet, within these walls, the woman of the household held authority. She rose early to see that the household was ready, to give instructions to the servants or to the helots, the enslaved people who worked the fields. Though her life might seem quiet compared to the clamor of warriors, outside it carried weight. She was the center of the family's survival, the one who kept its rhythm steady. The day often began with the practical needs of the household. Grain needed to be ground, bread prepared, and wool spun into thread. Yet in Sparta, unlike in many other Greek cities, women were not confined only to these tasks. They were expected to be strong, healthy, and capable, for their bodies were seen as the bearers of future soldiers. Morning might include exercise, running, throwing a discus, or practicing athletic drills that elsewhere were reserved only for men. Imagine a group of young Spartan girls, their garments short to allow freedom of movement, racing together under the pale morning sun. Their laughter mingles with the sound of training boys, the city alive with the rhythm of discipline and strength. For visitors from Athens or Corinth, such a sight was shocking. In other cities, women were expected to remain indoors, weaving quietly, hidden from public view. But in Sparta, women's presence in the open air, their bodies trained and strong, was a mark of pride. Their society believed that strong mothers would give birth to strong children, and this belief shaped every part of their upbringing and daily life. Even the way Spartan women dressed reflected this difference. Their chetons, simple woolen garments, were cut shorter than those of other Greek women, allowing freedom to move, to run, to train. To outsiders, it seemed immodest. To Spartans, it was practical. These choices were not about beauty but about function, about preparing the body for its role in a city built upon endurance. As the sun climbed higher, the rhythm of the day continued. Husbands and sons marched off to barracks or fields of training, leaving women in charge of homes and estates. But unlike in Athens, where women's authority was hidden behind doors, Spartan women acted with open confidence. They spoke to helots, managed the storage of grain, and saw that the vineyards were tended. Though their power was not political, it was practical, and it shaped the city's survival. Imagine now a Spartan woman standing in the doorway of her home, the early light shining on her face. She watches her husband depart for the barracks, knowing she may not see him for many days. She feels no fear in his absence, for she has long carried the burden of household duty. She turns back inside, giving instructions, ensuring that the fire on the hearth is tended, that the children are prepared, that the work of the day will go on smoothly. This daily life was both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary, in that it was filled with simple chores: bread baking, wool spinning, field watching. Extraordinary, in that it was performed with a sense of shared duty, a recognition that each woman's strength contributed to Sparta's power. To live here as a woman was to live under constant expectation to endure, to guide, to give birth, and to preserve the cities. Strength in ways both visible and unseen. Pause for a moment, and let yourself hear the sounds of such a morning. The low crackle of a hearth fire. The creak of a loom as threads are tightened. The rhythmic thud of feet as girls train in the courtyard. The clang of weapons faintly from afar. Together, these sounds form the music of a Spartan morning, a music that began with women, who set the tone for the day. In Sparta, the day began not only with chores but with purpose. Women knew that their role was central to the city's survival. Their bodies, their voices, and their discipline carried as much weight as the soldiers who trained endlessly for war. Each morning, as they rose to tend to the home and to their own strength, they stepped into a role unlike that of women anywhere else in Greece. And so, the day in Sparta began with both simplicity and strength. Simple in its household rhythm, strong in its expectations. For a woman here, every dawn was a reminder: she was not hidden, not silent, not powerless. She was the keeper of her home, the guardian of her children, and the quiet foundation upon which the city of warriors stood. Now let us step back in time, to the earliest years of a Spartan girl. Imagine the first cries of an infant, born in a city where strength was valued above all. In many Greek cities, a girl would be swaddled, kept close to the hearth, and raised to weave, cook, and live quietly in the home. But in Sparta, her life followed a different path. From the very beginning, she was expected to grow into a woman of vigor, one who would bear strong children and manage a household with authority. As a child, a Spartan girl was not hidden away. She ran in the courtyards, her feet dusty from the dry earth. She learned songs that praised courage and mocked cowardice. She joined her brothers and neighbors in exercises that startled visitors from other lands. To outsiders, it seemed strange, even improper, to see girls running, wrestling, or throwing. The discuss. But for Spartans, this was pride. They believed that training the body built not only strength but also resilience, and resilience was the very heart of their way of life. Picture a group of young girls in the early morning. They wear short chetons that leave their legs free for movement. Their hair is tied back tightly. They line up at the edge of a field, where the sun is just beginning to rise. At a signal, they sprint forward, their bare feet pounding the earth. Some stumble, some laugh, but all continue. Their breaths come fast, their cheeks flush with effort, and when they finish, they do not collapse in shame. They stand tall, proud of their speed and endurance. Training was not limited to running. Girls practiced throwing the javelin and discus, leaping over obstacles, and even wrestling. Their bodies grew strong, their muscles firm. These activities were not about vanity or beauty. They were about preparing the body for motherhood, for Spartans believed that healthy mothers bore healthy children. In a city where every life was dedicated to sustaining its warrior culture, this was no small duty. Yet physical training was not the only part of their childhood. Education in Sparta also emphasized music, dance, and poetry. Girls learned choral songs that praised the gods, honored heroes, and celebrated strength. During festivals, they performed in public, their voices rising in unison, their movements precise and bold. Unlike in Athens, where women rarely appeared in public, Spartan girls stood in the open, their confidence visible to all. The presence of girls in these activities often shocked visitors from other cities. Writers from outside Sparta sometimes mocked their boldness, their freedom, their strength. But to the Spartans themselves, these qualities were marks of pride. They believed that women were the backbone of their society. While men trained for war, fought, and often died far from home, it was women who ensured that the city endured. Childhood in Sparta also taught discipline. A girl learned to eat simple meals, to accept discomfort, and to endure hardship without complaint. She was not raised to expect luxury. She was raised to expect duty. Her toys were not delicate dolls but simple objects, and her games often mimicked the training of adults. Even in laughter, she learned lessons of endurance. Pause for a moment and picture the sound of such a morning. The stamping of feet on hard ground. The echo of voices singing in chorus. The laughter of girls who push one another to run faster, leap higher, be braver. These were not the hidden voices of quiet domestic life. These were the voices of girls being prepared to live as women who would carry the weight of a city. By the time she reached adolescence, a Spartan girl already stood apart from her counterparts in Athens or Corinth. Her body was strong, her posture confident, her mind disciplined. She had run under the open sun, sung before the community, and felt the pride of her own endurance. She knew that one day she would marry, bear children, and manage an estate. But she also knew, from her very childhood, that she was more than a passive figure. She was active, visible, and vital to the life of her city. In this way, the childhood and training of Spartan girls prepared them for a life unlike that of most women in Greece. It was a life of strength and discipline, yes, but also a life of presence and influence. From their earliest days, Spartan girls were shaped into women who stood tall, not hidden in the shadows, but walking with confidence beneath a bright Spartan sun. The sun rises higher over Sparta, and the streets fill with the movement of daily life. Among the sights that most startled visitors from other cities was the appearance of Spartan women. Their clothing, their posture, even the way they carried themselves set them apart. To the eyes of outsiders, they seemed bold, even shocking. But to the Spartans themselves, this was natural, a reflection of their values and their way of life. In most of Greece, women wore long, heavy garments that covered the body from shoulder to ankle. In Athens, a woman was expected to remain modest, veiled when in public, her presence almost hidden. But in Sparta, the cheton, the simple tunic of wool, was cut shorter. It fell to the knee, leaving the legs free for running, leaping, and training. This practical garment spoke volumes. It declared that the Spartan woman was not confined to the home, not bound by quiet invisibility, but expected to move, to act, to show her strength. Imagine a group of young women walking together through the marketplace. Their chetons are belted at the waist, the fabric plain but serviceable. Their hair, long and dark, is tied back simply, leaving their faces uncovered. They walk with steady steps, unhurried, unafraid of being seen. To an Athenian visitor, this sight would be astonishing. Where were the veils? Where was the modesty that kept women hidden indoors? Here, in Sparta, women's appearance told a different story. The simplicity of their clothing reflected the values of their city. Sparta was not a place of luxury or ornament. Jewelry was rare, cosmetics minimal. Beauty was not measured in painted faces or embroidered fabrics, but in health, vigor, and confidence. A Spartan woman's sun-darkened skin and strong muscles were themselves marks of beauty. They showed that she lived as her society expected, disciplined, resilient, and ready to bear strong children. Their appearance was also linked to their role in festivals. During choral performances, Spartan women sang and danced before the community, their garments moving freely with their bodies. Their voices carried in the open air, and their presence was public, visible, celebrated. This openness gave them a reputation among other Greeks for boldness. Some outsiders accused Spartan women of shamelessness, but within their own culture, they were admired for their courage and vitality. Clothing, in this way, became more than fabric. It was a symbol. The short chiton said, "I am not hidden. I am part of the life of this city." The uncovered face said, "I carry strength and dignity, not shame." The simple wool, free of jewels or dyes, said, "I live not for luxury but for endurance." Pause now and picture such a scene. The sun glints off the white stone of Spartan houses. Women walk steadily, their chitons brushing their knees, their steps confident. Their hair catches the light as they laugh together, their voices clear and unrestrained. This was their appearance, not decorative, but purposeful, not hidden, but present. To the people of Sparta, the body was not something to conceal. It was something to train, to honor, to use for the good of the community. Clothing and appearance followed this belief. Simplicity, strength, and visibility defined what it meant to be a woman here. And so, when we think of Spartan women, we do not picture delicate figures veiled in silk, hidden behind doors. We picture women standing tall in plain garments, their eyes clear, their movements unhesitating, their presence woven into the life of the city. Their clothing told the story of their role, active, strong, and essential to Sparta's survival. As the years of childhood training passed, a Spartan girl grew into a young woman, and soon her life turned toward marriage. Yet here, too, Sparta was unlike the rest of Greece. Marriage in Sparta was less about romance and more about duty, discipline, and the survival of the city itself. In Athens, a girl might be married off in her early teens, her role confined to the inner rooms of a household. She was expected to weave, bear children, and obey her husband. In Sparta, things were different. Girls typically married later, often in their late teens, giving them more time to grow strong, to train, and to reach physical maturity. This meant that by the time of marriage, Spartan women were taller, healthier, and more confident than many of their counterparts in other cities. The ceremony itself was unlike anything we might imagine today. According to tradition, the marriage began with a symbolic ritual. The bride's head might be shaved, her hair cut short. She was dressed in a man's cloak and sandals. Then, in an unusual custom, her husband would pretend to abduct her, carrying her away to the home where they would live. To us, this seems strange. But for the Spartans, it symbolized the crossing of a threshold, the girl leaving her childhood identity and stepping into her role as a wife. Even after marriage, life did not immediately resemble what we think of as a household. Spartan men lived most of their lives in military barracks, even after they married. They ate and trained with other soldiers, bound by discipline and comradeship. A husband might visit his wife only at night, slipping quietly into the home. By dawn, he returned to his barracks. In this way, many Spartan women ran their households largely on their own. Their husbands were present, yet absent, shadows of warriors who belonged more to the city than to the home. This arrangement gave Spartan women a unique kind of independence. They could not vote or join the assembly, but within their households and estates, their voices carried weight. They made decisions, managed property, and oversaw the labor of helots. Marriage in Sparta was a partnership shaped less by constant presence and more by mutual duty, each fulfilling their role for the survival of the city. Expectations within marriage were clear. The primary purpose was the production of healthy children, especially sons who would become warriors. A woman's body was honored as the vessel of future soldiers. This did not lessen the value of daughters, but it placed particular weight on the birth of boys. Mothers were praised for strength, not softness. A famous Spartan saying captures this spirit: "With your shield, or on it." It was said of soldiers, but also spoken by mothers to their sons, urging them to return victorious or not at all. And yet, within these rigid expectations, there was also affection. Archaeological evidence and later accounts suggest that Spartan couples could develop deep bonds of respect and trust. A husband admired his wife's strength and confidence, while she respected his discipline and courage. Their love may not have been adorned with poetry or public gestures, but it was built on endurance and shared duty. Pause now and imagine a Spartan wedding night. The fire burns low, the air filled with the scent of olive wood. The bride, hair newly shorn, sits quietly. Her husband arrives in secret, after eating in the barracks. They share only a few hours before he must leave again. There is little luxury, little ceremony. Yet within these moments lies the quiet bond of a partnership shaped by the needs of a city forever at war. For women, marriage was not the end of freedom. In many ways, it was the beginning of their true role, the management of land, the raising of children, the preservation of traditions. The shaved head grew back, the plain cloak was replaced with the chiton once more, and life settled into its rhythm. Strong, disciplined, and steady, a married woman of Sparta stood as the hidden backbone of the city. And so, marriage in Sparta was not about delicate romance. It was about strength, endurance, and continuity. It was a contract between two lives, woven into the fabric of a society that placed survival above all. For the woman, it was another step in her journey, one that demanded courage, responsibility, and quiet resilience. In Sparta, few duties weighed as heavily on a woman's shoulders as the task of bearing children. It was seen not only as a personal matter, but as a responsibility to the entire city. A Spartan mother was expected to give life to the next generation of warriors, those who would keep the state strong, disciplined, and unyielding against its enemies. Yet unlike in many parts of Greece, this duty did not strip women of dignity. In fact, it gave them power. To be a mother in Sparta was to hold a place of honor. The health of the children, their strength and survival, were seen as direct reflections of the mother's own strength. A woman's body was not hidden away or dismissed, it was recognized as essential to the survival of the community. Pregnancy was considered a serious stage of service. From the moment a woman conceived, she carried not only her own child but the hopes of Sparta. Stories tell us that Spartan women continued physical activity while expecting. Gentle exercise, walking, even maintaining discipline and posture and food, all were thought to strengthen both mother and child. In this, their society was unusual. Where other Greek women might have been secluded or treated as fragile, Spartan women were urged to remain resilient. Birth itself was often without ceremony, but it was deeply significant. A Spartan woman was surrounded by other women during labor, supported by hands that had themselves carried children into the world. In those dim rooms, lit only by lamps, the cries of new life echoed as a reminder that Sparta's survival depended on these moments of pain and courage. And yet, not every birth ended with joy. The city was ruthless in its expectations. Newborns were inspected. If a child was judged too weak or frail, they might not be allowed to live. It is a harsh truth, difficult to imagine in our modern world. But for the Spartans, the survival of the city outweighed individual sorrow. Only the strong were meant to endure. For mothers, this brought both pride and sorrow: pride in bringing forth a child fit for Sparta, sorrow for those whose infants did not survive the judgment. Still, the bond between mother and child was fierce. Spartan mothers raised their children with discipline and expectation, but also with deep affection. Daughters learned the strength of their mothers, while sons absorbed their mother's stern encouragement. When a boy grew old enough to join the agoge, his training began, but the imprint of his mother's words never faded. It was said that Spartan women spoke with unusual sharpness, their words cutting and direct. Many famous sayings come not from kings or warriors, but from mothers. A woman handing her son his shield before battle might say, "Return with it, or on it." This was not cruelty, it was a reminder that honor mattered more than survival. Another story tells of a woman who, upon hearing of her son's death, simply asked whether he had fought bravely. When she was told yes, she replied, "Then that is enough." To us, these stories can seem hard, even cold. But within them lies a profound meaning. To the Spartan mother, her child was not only her own, or she belonged to the state, to the community. The sorrow of loss was mingled with the pride of sacrifice. Love and duty intertwined until they were almost inseparable. For daughters, childbearing held a quieter but equally important meaning. They, too, would one day step into this cycle. They watched their mothers endure labor, nurture children, and manage households. They learned that strength was not only on the battlefield, but also in the quiet endurance of daily life. To grow into womanhood was to accept this continuity, to become part of the long chain of Spartan mothers who bore the weight of the city's survival. Close your eyes now and imagine a Spartan home at night. The fire glows faintly. A mother cradles her child, humming softly in the Dorian tongue. Outside, the city is silent, its men away in barracks, its walls guarded by watchmen. Within this small circle of warmth, the mother's love is steady. She knows her child may one day march to war, or may one day bear children of their own. But for this moment, she simply holds them close, her strength wrapping around them like a cloak. This was the paradox of Sparta, a place of unyielding discipline, where tenderness was rare in public, but strong in the private bonds between mother and child. Women bore not only children, but also the weight of meaning. They gave life, nurtured it, and then let it go to serve the city. It was a quiet heroism, lived not on battlefields but in homes, in childbirth, and in whispered words of courage. And so, in Sparta, childbearing was never only a personal matter. It was the heart of society's survival, the foundation on which the warrior state stood. A Spartan woman's body was her gift to her city, and her children were both her legacy and her offering. When a Spartan woman gave birth, her duty did not end with the first cry of her child. In truth, it was only the beginning of a long, demanding journey, one that shaped the next generation of warriors and women. Motherhood in Sparta was not a quiet life of seclusion, nor a gentle sheltering of children from the world. Instead, it was an active role, marked by discipline, guidance, and pride in preparing sons and daughters for their future paths. From their earliest days, Spartan children were taught to be strong. Mothers encouraged their little ones to run, to stretch, to endure both hunger and hardship in small, controlled ways. Even as toddlers, children were not coddled. A Spartan mother might allow her child to stumble and fall, then gently but firmly encourage them to rise on their own. To her, this was love, not indulgence, but preparation. The stories say that Spartan mothers used sharp words as often as gentle hands. They were not known for soft lullabies or endless comforts. Instead, they trained their children with short, powerful sayings, phrases that carried the values of courage, obedience, and resilience. A young boy might hear his mother say, "Better to die bravely than live in shame." A girl might be told, "Strength is your beauty." These lessons settled deep into the children's minds, forming the foundation of Spartan character. For sons, the path toward the state-run training system began early. Until the age of 7, a boy lived with his mother. Those years were precious. A mother's discipline, her encouragement, and even her sternness were meant to prepare him for the separation that would come. She was his first teacher, his first example of strength. Many Spartans later remembered their mother's words more vividly than their fathers, for it was the mother who shaped the boy's earliest sense of duty. When a boy turned 7, he left home for the age. For the mother, this was a bittersweet moment. Imagine her watching her son walk away, his small feet carrying him toward a life of hardship and brotherhood. She would not cuddle him with tears. Instead, she would stand tall, perhaps with pride hidden behind her steady gaze. To cry would dishonor him, and dishonor herself. To give him strength, she gave him her silence and her courage. Yet even after her son entered the age, her role was not finished. Mothers often visited, offering guidance in subtle ways. They encouraged their sons to endure the trials of hunger, cold, and punishment. They reminded them that every pain was temporary, but honor was eternal. The bond between Spartan mothers and their sons was unusual in the Greek world, deep, enduring, and shaped by mutual respect. For daughters, education was more direct. Unlike elsewhere in Greece, Spartan girls did not stay confined to their homes. They trained alongside one another in running, wrestling, and dance. Mothers watched proudly as their daughters developed strong bodies, for these would one day carry children and nurture them into strength. But education was not only physical. Girls also learned the discipline of managing households, speaking with clarity, and handling resources. Mothers taught daughters to be independent, outspoken, and bold. In Athens, women were often expected to stay silent and hidden. But in Sparta, a woman's voice was valued. She was expected to manage the estate while her husband was at war. She needed wit, confidence, and intelligence to do so. These traits were cultivated from childhood, and mothers were the first to instill them. The home itself was a classroom. Around the hearth, mothers told stories of heroes and ancestors. They spoke of battles fought, of women who endured hardship with courage, of sayings passed down through generations. These tales were not fairy stories, they were lessons in honor, survival, and pride. A daughter listening at her mother's knee learned that her worth was not in jewels or fine clothes, but in her strength of spirit and clarity of mind. Motherhood, then, was not simply nurturing, it was shaping. Spartan women were sculptors of character. They molded sons into warriors, daughters into resilient women, and both into loyal citizens of Sparta. It was a quiet form of power, exercised daily, year after year, in ways both small and profound. Let us imagine, for a moment, a Spartan evening. A mother sits with her daughter, braiding her hair after a day of exercise. The girl is strong, her arms toned from running, her cheeks flushed from wrestling. The mother speaks softly as her hands weave the braids, telling her of the duty she will carry when she too becomes a mother. She reminds her that strength is a gift, and wisdom is a treasure. The daughter listens, her eyes steady, absorbing the lesson not as a burden, but as her birthright. Now picture another scene, a boy of 7, about to leave for the age. His mother kneels before him, adjusting his small tunic. She places her hands on his shoulders, looks into his eyes, and says a few words, sharp, brief, unforgettable. Then she sends him off, standing tall as he walks away. Behind her stern gaze lies a heart that itches, but she does not allow her son to see it. For his courage will mirror hers, and her silence will strengthen him. In this way, Spartan motherhood was both tender and stern, both private and public. It was an education that began in the cradle and echoed through every stage of a child's life. And though their sons might die in battle, though their daughters might face the hardships of managing estates, Spartan mothers knew that their lessons lived on. To be a mother in Sparta was to hold the future in your hands, not gently, but firmly. To shape it, to harden it, and to let it go, always with pride. Marriage in Sparta was unlike marriage in most other parts of Greece. Where Athenian brides were often married in their early teens, treated as possessions, and expected to remain quiet in the shadows of their husbands, Spartan women stepped into marriage with more strength, more agency, and more confidence. To marry in Sparta was not to vanish into obscurity, but to form a partnership home shaped by the state, the family, and the needs of the warrior society. Spartan women usually married later than other Greek women. Rather than being wed in childhood, they married in their late teens or even early 20s in age, when they were physically mature, strong, and healthy. The Spartans believed that a woman's body must be ready to bear strong children, and so they allowed time for her to grow before marriage. This made Spartan marriages quite unusual in the Greek world. The ceremony itself was simple, even stark. A bride was often taken from her family home in the night, in a kind of ritualized capture. Her hair might be cut short, and she might be dressed in men's clothing. The symbolism was powerful. She shed the girlhood that tied her to her family, and was transformed into a wife prepared for partnership. Her new role was not one of submission, but one of shared duty. Marriages in Sparta were often practical arrangements. Love, though it could bloom, was not the primary goal. The true purpose was the creation of strong children who would serve the city. Yet this does not mean that affection was absent. Many accounts suggest that Spartan husbands and wives respected each other deeply. Unlike in other cities, where men spent most of their time in the home and women remained hidden, Spartan men were away training, fighting, or governing. This gave their wives an unusual amount of independence. Life as a Spartan wife could be strange in its rhythms. Husbands did not move in immediately after marriage. Instead, for many years, they lived with their fellow warriors in barracks, returning only secretly to their wives at night. Imagine the quiet footsteps of a husband sneaking into the household, not for secrecy of love but because the state demanded it. These nightly visits gave a sense of intensity to marriage, for husband and wife cherished the moments they did have together. For the Spartan woman, marriage was not an end to her independence but rather an expansion of it. While her husband was away, she managed the household, the servants, and often the land itself. She oversaw harvests, controlled resources, and ensured that the family estate prospered. In many ways, she became the true head of the home, her authority respected by both family and community. This independence shocked outsiders. In Athens, women were rarely seen in public, their voices muted. In Sparta, wives commanded estates, spoke boldly, and even engaged in trade when necessary. The partnership between husband and wife was therefore one of balance. The husband carried the sword, the wife carried the home. Both roles were essential, and both were respected. In this, Spartan marriage differed greatly from the rest of Greece. It was not a romance in the modern sense, but it was a bond forged of necessity, respect, and mutual duty. There are stories of Spartan wives giving their husbands sharp, witty words that reveal this dynamic. One tale tells of a woman who handed her husband his shield before battle, saying simply, "With it, or on it." These were not idle words. They were a reminder of his duty to return victorious or to return dead, but never to return in disgrace. Such sayings reveal the mixture of sternness and loyalty that defined Spartan marriages. And yet, there were moments of tenderness, though rarely recorded by the historians of the time. We can imagine a Spartan couple sitting together quietly, the husband weary from training, the wife strong from her daily responsibilities. Perhaps they exchanged few words, for words were unnecessary. Their bond was carried not in gestures of softness but in the strength of trust. Marriage also meant children, and in this, partnership was most evident. Both husband and wife were judged by their ability to bring forth strong offspring. A barren union was a tragedy not only for the family but for the city. The state's interest in the strength of its citizens reached into the most private corners of marriage. Some records even suggest that if a husband was too old or unfit, arrangements might be made for another man to father children with his wife, for the good of Sparta. Such customs were shocking to other Greeks, but to Spartans, the city always came before personal desire. For daughters, watching their mothers in marriage taught them the balance of authority and duty. They saw women who stood tall, who spoke clearly, and who were unafraid to take charge when men were absent. This shaped the next generation, ensuring that Spartan marriages continued to be strong partnerships. For sons, the example was equally powerful. They learned that their mothers were not silent shadows but voices of authority. This shaped the way Spartan men viewed women not as hidden figures, but as active partners in the survival of the state. Let us imagine, for a moment, a Spartan wedding night. The bride, newly shorn of her long hair, sits in her new home, her eyes steady. The groom arrives quietly, his cloak still smelling of the barracks where he trains. Their meeting is not filled with ceremony, but with a quiet recognition. They are bound not by indulgence, but by purpose. He must serve in battle. She must serve in the household. Together, they form the core of Spartan strength. In this way, marriage in Sparta was never just personal. It was a bond that tied two people to each other, and to their city. It was not the romantic tales of poets, but a harder, sterner kind of partnership. And yet, within that severity lay a respect that gave Spartan women a voice louder and clearer than that of their sisters elsewhere in Greece. To marry in Sparta was to step into shared responsibility. It was not an ending, but a new beginning, a new stage of strength, and a new form of duty, one that bound wife, husband, and city together in an unbreakable chain. If you close your eyes and step into the rhythm of a Spartan woman's daily life, you would find a balance of labor, authority, and quiet discipline. Unlike women in most Greek cities, who were confined within the household walls, Spartan women moved more freely, carrying themselves with the dignity of those who were trusted with great responsibility. The home was her domain, but it was no prison. A Spartan woman woke early, perhaps before the first light had broken across the Tagetis mountains. She would see to the household, not through endless toil of her own hands, but through direction and management. Servants and helots, the enslaved population who worked the fields and homes, carried out much of the manual labor. Yet the Spartan wife was no idle figure. She oversaw them with sharp eyes, ensuring that the household ran with the same discipline that her husband faced in the barracks. Food had to be managed, clothes maintained, children prepared, and the estate itself preserved. For many Spartan women, this included overseeing large amounts of farmland. While their husbands were away training or at war, wives became the stewards of the land. They had to make decisions about planting, harvests, and trade, often directing dozens of helots. In this sense, they became something rare in the ancient world, women who not only managed but also controlled wealth and resources on a significant scale. It is little wonder, then, that Spartan women gained a reputation for having more independence than any other Greek women. Outsiders, especially Athenians, sneered at this freedom, accusing Spartan women of arrogance or excess. But the reality was simpler. Sparta's strict military life required women to fill the gaps that men left behind. If men were to be warriors, then women had to be the backbone of the home and the economy. Daily life did not mean seclusion. Women were seen outside, moving through the city, speaking boldly in the agora, and giving commands with confidence. Imagine the surprise of an Athenian visitor, expecting to see veiled and silent women, only to find Spartan wives walking proudly, their voices strong, their presence undeniable. To the outsider, it looked scandalous. To the Spartans, it was simply natural. A woman's responsibilities extended beyond material management. She was expected to raise children not only with love but also with the sternness that Sparta demanded. Sons, from the earliest years, were prepared for the agega, the state training system that would transform them into warriors. Mothers raised them with toughness, knowing that softness could weaken them. Yet this toughness did not erase love. It only reshaped it. A Spartan mother's love was fierce, sharp-edged, and unwavering. Daughters, meanwhile, were guided into strength of their own. They learned how to manage estates, how to speak their minds, and how to carry themselves with dignity. A Spartan girl watched her mother command servants, oversee the harvest, and exchange words with authority. From these examples, she learned that a Spartan woman must be both guardian and leader. Still, not all of daily life was stern. There were moments of gathering, of laughter, of community. Women might sit together, spinning or weaving, their hands moving in rhythm as they exchanged stories. They might attend festivals, where the air was filled with song and dance. They might walk with their children, teaching them through stories of ancestors and heroes. These softer rhythms gave balance to the harder edges of Spartan life. The home itself was not luxurious. Spartan values frowned upon excess, encouraging simplicity even within private walls. Furniture was plain, clothes were practical, and meals were simple. Yet the order and discipline of the household carried its own kind of beauty, a beauty rooted in purpose rather than ornament. Managing a home also meant managing reputation. In a society where honor was everything, a woman's ability to maintain her household well reflected not only on her but also on her husband and family. A disorderly estate was a shame. A well-managed home was a source of pride. In this way, each woman's daily work contributed to the larger strength of Sparta itself. There is a story told of a Spartan woman asked why Spartan women had so much power. Her answer was simple: because we are the mothers of men. That phrase carried a truth that shaped daily life. Everything a Spartan woman did, managing the home, guiding her children, directing the servants, was aimed at sustaining the strength of the warrior state. Imagine, for a moment, walking through the streets of Sparta. You would see women with confident steps, their voices firm as they gave instructions. You would see them at markets, handling trade. You would see them supervising fields at harvest, their presence as natural as the soldiers drilling in the distance. The city lived on the strength of its men, but it survived on the quiet, steady discipline of its women. In this balance of strength and care, Spartan women carried a daily life unlike any in Greece. They were managers, leaders, and teachers within their households. Their homes were not places of weakness, but fortresses of discipline that reflected the broader values of their society. So when you think of daily life in Sparta, think not only of men with shields in formation but also of women with strong eyes and steady hands, guiding households that made those warriors possible. Without the quiet, daily work of these women, the Spartan way would have collapsed. Their lives were the silent rhythm beneath the thunder of Sparta's drums. If you imagine the Greek world, you might see men as the holders of wealth and land. In Athens, Thebes, or Corinth, women were shut out from inheritance, kept from property ownership, and bound to their husbands' fortunes. Yet Sparta was different, so different that outsiders gossiped about it for centuries. For here, women not only inherited land but in many cases controlled vast estates, making them among the wealthiest women in all of Greece. How did this happen? The answer begins with the military system. Spartan men lived much of their lives in barracks, under the discipline of the state. They married, but their marriages were shadowed by absence. A husband might be gone for years training, campaigning, serving the state, who then would tend his land, guard his inheritance, and pass it on to the next generation. The answer was his wife. And so, by necessity, Spartan women gained authority over land and property. When a father died, his daughters could inherit. When a husband was away or fell in battle, his widow might take control of his estate until her son was of age. Over generations, this pattern made Spartan women landholders in their own right. Some estimates suggest that by the 4th century BC, women owned nearly 40 of all Spartan land, an unimaginable figure in the rest of Greece. To the Athenians, this was scandalous. They sneered that Spartan women were spoiled, too wealthy, too bold. The philosopher Aristotle himself grumbled that women's control of property weakened Sparta, accusing them of luxury and disorder. But his judgment reveals less about Spartan women, and more about how shocking their independence seemed to outsiders. Within Sparta itself, wealth did not mean idle pleasure. Women were not reclining on couches surrounded by servants. Instead, they were working directing harvests, managing slaves, overseeing the flow of goods. To control property was not simply to enjoy wealth, but to shoulder responsibility. A Spartan woman had to ensure her estate fed her family, supported her husband's military duties, and fulfilled the expectations of the state. Imagine walking through the countryside near Sparta. You would see fields of barley, vineyards heavy with grapes, groves of olive trees. Helots bent their backs in labor, but it was often the mistress of the household who directed them. Her authority was not symbolic, it was practical, rooted in the land itself. With property came power. A woman who controlled wealth could arrange marriages for her children, secure alliances, and protect her family's standing. She could influence political debates indirectly, her voice carried by the strength of her household's fortune. Though she could not vote in the assembly or march with a spear, her influence pulsed quietly through the veins of Spartan society. This independence gave rise to stories of Spartan women who spoke boldly, even to kings. They were unafraid to criticize or to advise, their confidence grounded not only in their status as mothers of warriors but also in their role as keepers of estates. Wealth gave them a platform. Land gave them stability. And the peculiar demands of Spartan life gave them freedom to use both. Inheritance laws added to this unusual situation. A Spartan daughter might inherit directly from her father if there were no sons. Even when sons existed, land was often divided among children, giving women a direct share. Through dowries and marriages, property shifted into women's hands. Unlike in other Greek cities, these transfers were not tightly controlled to limit female ownership. Instead, the state's priority was military strength, not family. Well, if women ended up wealthy, so be it. What did this wealth mean for daily life? It meant that some women lived with considerable security. They could afford fine clothing, though Spartan simplicity discouraged extravagance. They could command respect from neighbors. They could provide better for their children. And when their husbands returned from war, those men often came back to wives who had grown stronger, more confident, and more capable in their absence. But wealth also brought tension. Some men resented the independence of their wives. Some feared that women's power was growing too great, that their freedom was undermining the strict control the state demanded. Laws were occasionally proposed to restrict women's property, though enforcement was uneven. Still, the fact that such debates existed tells us how significant women's wealth had become. Beyond the economics, there was symbolism. A wealthy Spartan woman represented the strength of Sparta itself. She was a reminder that this was not a society where women were hidden away in shadows. She could be seen walking her land, supervising work, handling matters that elsewhere would have been reserved for men. To her daughters, she was proof that women could be trusted with power. To her sons, she was an example of discipline and authority equal to their fathers. One ancient writer captured the difference with a remark: in other Greek cities, women are ruled by men. In Sparta, women rule their men. This was, of course, an exaggeration, sharpened by the shock outsiders felt. But exaggeration often hides a kernel of truth. Spartan women, through their property and inheritance, commanded a kind of quiet authority that was rare, if not unique, in the Greek world. If you imagine yourself as a Spartan woman standing at the edge of her fields, you would feel the weight of this responsibility. The sun would be high, the hills rolling in the distance, and the voices of helots calling across the land. Each choice you made when to plant, how to harvest, how to store grain would echo far beyond your home. It would feed warriors, sustain children, and shape the fortunes of your city. And so wealth in Sparta was not just silver coins or acres of land. It was a form of power, entrusted to women not because men chose to share it but because the Spartan way of life required it. The system itself forced women into roles of economic strength, and once they had that strength, they carried it with a dignity that astonished the rest of Greece. In inheritance, in property, in wealth, Spartan women carved out a place unlike any other. Their lives were not easy, but they were powerful. And in their power, we glimpse a society where women were not merely silent shadows but active pillars of strength. When you think of marriage in the ancient world, you might picture a bride cloaked in silence, a ceremony arranged by her father, and a life spent largely within the walls of a household. For many Greek women in Athens, for example, if that image is close to the truth. But in Sparta, the reality was startlingly different. Marriage was not only a family arrangement but a state concern, and it unfolded in ways that shocked outsiders. Spartan marriage customs were unusual, even ritualistic. A young woman might be abducted by her prospective husband in a symbolic act. Her hair would be cut short, and she would be dressed in a simple man's cloak and sandals, made to resemble a young male companion rather than a bride. She would be placed in a darkened room, waiting. Then, her husband-to-be would visit her secretly, often at night. This ritual echoed Sparta's obsession with toughness and simplicity, stripping marriage of luxury or display. Yet beneath the ritual was a deeper reality. Spartan marriages were marked by separation. Men lived in the military barracks until the age of 30. Even after marrying, a husband would not move in with his wife. Instead, he would visit her in secret, often stealing away from the barracks at night. Imagine the strangeness of it: your marriage hidden in shadows, your husband slipping through the dark just to spend an hour by your side. To outsiders, this secrecy seemed bizarre, but the Spartans believed it made marriage stronger. Desire, they thought, burned brighter when it was restrained. By not living together too soon, a couple would build longing and respect. And in the meantime, the wife carried on her household responsibilities largely independent, managing her land and family without her husband's constant presence. Marriage in Sparta was not purely about companionship, it was about producing strong children. The state encouraged unions that would bring forth healthy offspring. If a man and woman were both strong, their marriage was celebrated. If a husband was weak or old, and his wife was still of childbearing age, arrangements might be made for her to bear children with another man, ensuring that the next generation remained vigorous. To Greek outsiders, this sounded scandalous, almost immoral. But to Spartans, it was practical, an extension of their devotion to the state above the individual. For women, this meant that their role as mothers was central to their identity. A Spartan woman was expected to bring forth children who would one day be warriors or mothers of warriors. But unlike in Athens, where women were married off in their early teens, Spartan women typically married later, often in their late teens or even early 20s. This gave them more time to grow, to strengthen their bodies, and to prepare for childbirth. A healthier, older bride meant healthier babies, or so the Spartans believed. Childbearing itself was a matter of pride and endurance. Women were expected to approach labor with courage, the same courage their husbands showed in battle. There was even a saying that a woman's gravestone might honor her only in two cases: if she died in childbirth, or if a man died in war. Both were seen as ultimate sacrifices for Sparta. Imagine the solemn dignity of such a belief that bringing life into the world carried the same honor as taking up a shield and falling in battle. Family life, shaped by these customs, was unusual. A Spartan mother might spend much of her time apart from her husband. Her sons would leave home at the age of 7 to begin military training, rarely returning except on brief visits. Her daughters might stay longer, but they too were expected to marry and take on responsibilities quickly. The household was not a place of constant family togetherness but a hub of duty and preparation. And yet, there was warmth here too. Mothers were deeply respected. A famous Spartan saying tells of a mother giving her son his shield before battle with the words, "Return with it, or on it." This was not coldness, it was fierce pride. Mothers loved their children, but their love was bound up with duty to the state. To see a son die bravely was not only a loss, but a badge of honor. Marriage and family in Sparta also carried a note of paradox. Women had freedom within marriage that shocked other Greeks. They could inherit, manage property, and live with more independence. Yet their lives were also bound tightly to the expectations of the state. They were free in daily matters but chained to a destiny of motherhood and sacrifice. If you imagine yourself as a Spartan bride, the picture is vivid. You stand tall, your body strong from years of training. Your hair is cut short in the ritual, your cloak plain. You know your husband will not live with you, that your marriage will be shaped by stolen moments. But you also know that your children will be born strong, that your role is honored, and that your voice, though not heard in politics, carries weight in your home and in your community. The rhythms of family life reinforced Sparta's central paradox. Women had power, but it was power given for a purpose. They could manage land, speak boldly, and live with a confidence that astonished outsiders. But all of it was tied to the expectation that they would bear and raise the next generation of Spartans. Marriage, then, was not just a private contract, it was a civic duty. Family was not only about love but about loyalty to the state. And in this balance of intimacy and duty, Spartan women lived lives at once restricted and extraordinary. Religion was the heartbeat of Greek life, and in Sparta it was no different. Temples, sacrifices, and festivals punctuated the calendar, weaving the sacred into the everyday. But what set Sparta apart was the role that women played in these religious rhythms. Where in many Greek cities women were hidden away during rituals or given minor roles, Spartan women often stood in the spotlight. Imagine yourself walking through Sparta during a festival day. The dusty streets are alive with music and chanting. Warriors march, priests prepare sacrifices, but the women are visible, confident, and central. Religion was one of the few public arenas in which women's voices were not only permitted but necessary. Take, for example, the worship of Artemis Orthia. Her sanctuary lay near the banks of the Eurotas River, and it was a site of intense devotion. The goddess Artemis was tied to fertility, to the wilderness, and to transitions of life. At Orthia's shrine, rituals often involve young men enduring painful ordeals, whipped until their endurance was proven. But the ceremony was not only about them. Women presided, sang hymns, and maintained the sacred space. They were keepers of the divine order, linking the courage of warriors to the blessings of the gods. Women also played a major role in the worship of Helen of Troy, who was not just a legend in Sparta but a revered figure. Helen was said to have been born in this land, daughter of Zeus and Leia. Shrines to her dotted the countryside, and Spartan women prayed to her for beauty, fertility, and protection in marriage. It is striking to think of women venerating a figure who was at once human and divine, wife and goddess, a woman whose choices and fate shaped wars. Helen embodied both the power and peril of womanhood, and Spartan women turned to her as a symbol of their own strength. Then there were the festivals, the grand spectacles that brought the city together. The most famous for women was the Hyacinthia, honoring the youth Hyacinthus and the god Apollo. During this festival, women joined men in processions, wearing their finest clothing, singing hymns that echoed through the streets. For 3 days, Sparta became a city of ritual mourning and joy, of remembrance and renewal. Women's voices rose in song, and their presence was vital to the harmony of the celebration. Another festival that set Sparta apart was the Gemmophaeia, the festival of the naked youths. This event celebrated discipline and endurance. Young men performed dances, often unclothed, in displays of strength and coordination. But women were not mere spectators, they had their own choruses and performances. In fact, women's choral singing was one of the most important features of Spartan religion. Their songs, filled with praise or satire, celebrated bravery and shamed cowardice. A woman's song could raise the reputation of a man, or tarnish it. Through ritual, women wielded a power that was both social and spiritual. We cannot overlook the role of women as priestesses. In Sparta, certain cults were led by women who held positions of real influence. The priestess of Athena Chalkioikos, the Bronze House, was one such figure. Holding sacred duties, she guided rituals that touched not only private devotion but also the public life of the city. Priestesses managed sacred lands, controlled temple finances, and mediated between mortals and the gods. In a society where women could not join the military or the government, priesthood offered a different kind of authority, a spiritual one, respected by all. Religion also gave women a rare chance to gather together openly. Imagine the energy of a women's festival, the swirl of fabric, the rhythm of feet in dance, the collective voices rising in song. In daily life, a woman might be absorbed in her household duties, her fields, or her children. But during festivals, she became part of something larger, a community of women bound by ritual and shared devotion. These gatherings were not only sacred but also social, allowing women to form bonds, share stories, and pass down traditions. Rituals tied to fertility and childbirth held special significance. Women prayed to Eileithyia, goddess of childbirth, asking for safe deliveries. They made offerings to Hera, queen of the gods, protector of marriage. And in times of difficulty, they turned to Artemis, whose power over life and death in childbirth was deeply feared and respected. A Spartan woman, facing the dangers of labor, might find strength in these divine figures, imagining that her pain echoed the trials of goddesses themselves. Sacrifice was at the heart of Greek religion, and women often prepared offerings, whether a loaf of bread, a woven garment, or the blood of an animal. In Sparta, the connection between sacrifice and community was profound. Each offering tied the individual to the state, each ritual reinforced the belief that the gods watched over Sparta's destiny. For women, participating in these acts meant that their devotion was part of the city's strength. One striking element of Spartan religion was its blending of austerity and celebration. Unlike the ornate temples of Athens, Spartan sanctuaries were simple, almost severe. Yet the festivals were lively, full of energy. Women danced in circles, chanted hymns, and sometimes mocked men with playful songs. This contrast reflected Sparta's values: simplicity in daily life, intensity in ritual, and the intertwining of discipline with joy. To imagine yourself as a Spartan woman at a festival is to step into a world of color and sound. Your long peplos robe sways as you walk in procession, your voice joins a chorus of women, your offerings rest on the altar. You know that your presence matters not as a hidden observer, but as an essential participant. Your song can honor the brave, shame the cowardly, or lift the spirit of the community. Through religion, your voice carries weight in a society that often denies you public power. Religion gave Spartan women a rare bridge between the private and the public. It allowed them to shape reputation, to honor the gods, and to remind the men who fought and ruled that the divine order depended on women's devotion as much as men's courage. Festivals were not escapes from duty but extensions of it, woven into the fabric of a city that demanded loyalty from every citizen. Thus, in the sacred realm of ritual and festival, Spartan women found a space where they were not only seen but celebrated. In their songs, dances, and offerings, they carried the heartbeat of Sparta, binding the city not just with shields and swords, but with voices raised to the heavens. To understand the life of a Spartan woman, you must also understand those who lived beneath them, the helots. These were not free citizens but enslaved people, bound to the land, conquered by Sparta in war, and forced to work the fields. Their presence shaped every part of Spartan life, including the lives of women. For without helots, the Spartan system could not have existed. Picture yourself on your family's estate, fields stretching beyond the horizon, olives swaying in the breeze, sheep grazing in the distance. You are not working those fields directly. Instead, helots labor there from dawn until dusk, tending crops, harvesting grapes, pressing olives. Their work allows you to live differently than women in other Greek cities. Where Athenian women may weave endlessly or fetch water daily, you have a measure of freedom. That freedom, however, rests upon the backs of the helots. Spartan. Women managed the estates in ways men could not, for the men were almost always away training, patrolling, or at war. That meant you, as a Spartan woman, had authority over helots. You directed planting and harvesting, ordered livestock tended, ensured granaries were filled. Helots reported to you, and their obedience was expected. In this way, women held real economic power. Property, after all, was the foundation of wealth in Sparta, and women often managed it directly. But the relationship between Spartan women and helots was not one of kindness or equality. It was steeped in hierarchy, suspicion, and fear. Helots outnumbered citizens many times over. Some estimates suggest there were 7 or more helots for every Spartan. The fear of revolt was constant. You would know, as every Spartan did, that helots resented their bondage, and uprisings had erupted before. Part of your authority, therefore, required vigilance. Ritualized violence reminded helots of their place. Each year, Spartan authorities declared war on them, legally allowing their killing. Young Spartan men, as part of their training, stalked and murdered helots at night in what was called the cryptia. This was not only to terrorize the helot population but also to harden the men. As a woman, you did not take part in such acts, but you lived within the same system of fear and control. Your prosperity, your children's food, your family's survival, these all depended on the subjugation of the helots. There were moments when women and helots interacted in more personal ways. A helot woman might work in your household, helping with domestic chores or caring for children. She might prepare food, weave cloth, or fetch water. To you, she was both necessary and invisible. Her labor made your life possible, but her humanity was rarely acknowledged. Yet behind her lowered eyes, she carried her own story, a family forced into bondage, ancestors conquered, a people held down for generations. Marriage and motherhood brought other intersections. Some helots bore children fathered by Spartan men. These children, neither fully free nor fully enslaved, complicated the social order. While women might not control these unions, they lived within their consequences. It was a reminder that the boundaries between free and enslaved, though rigid, were not unbroken. Even in ritual, helots were present. During religious festivals, they might carry offerings, prepare feasts, or sing in choruses of mockery directed at themselves. The humiliation was deliberate, reinforcing their subordinate role. For a Spartan woman, witnessing this contrast between your own public honor and their degradation reinforced your status. Where you could stand in song and dance, they served in silence. And yet, some scholars suggest that Spartan women may have felt ambivalence. While helots were necessary for the system, their numbers and presence were overwhelming. Did women ever fear them, especially when men were away? Did they sense the precariousness of their privilege? It is impossible to know fully, but you can imagine the unease of a woman walking across her fields, a dozen helots bending their backs to her command, knowing that if they rose together, her authority could vanish in a moment. The economic role of women was strengthened by this dependence. Unlike elsewhere in Greece, Spartan women could inherit property. They controlled dowries, land, and wealth. With helots to till the soil, women could amass and manage estates, making them among the wealthiest landholders in all Greece. By some accounts, women controlled nearly 2/5 of Spartan land. This was extraordinary in a world where women usually had no independent property at all. But again, this wealth rested on helot labor. Consider also the moral lessons taught to your children. As a Spartan mother, you raised sons to become warriors. You may have told them not to cry, not to fear pain, to endure hunger without complaint. Yet, they knew, as you did, that the food on their plates was harvested by helot hands. The contradiction was sharp, a society that prized self-sufficiency built upon the dependence of others. Your task was to smooth over this tension, to instill pride in your children for their Spartan identity, even if that identity was founded on the suffering of another people. At times, helots revolted. One of the most famous uprisings occurred after an earthquake devastated Sparta in the 5th century BC. Buildings crumbled, citizens died, and the helots seized the moment. They rose in rebellion, holding fortresses and challenging the Spartans for years. As a woman during such turmoil, you would have lived with constant fear that your home would be attacked, your children endangered, your livelihood destroyed. The rebellion was eventually crushed, but it left scars. The ever-present anxiety of revolt was a shadow over daily life. And yet, life continued. Fields needed tending, harvests brought in, festivals celebrated. Helots remained in bondage, and Spartan women continued to direct their labor. The system endured for centuries, until Sparta itself began to decline. But for generations, this uneasy relationship defined what it meant to be a Spartan woman, powerful within your own society, yet dependent upon the subjugation of others. To imagine yourself in this position is to feel both authority and unease. You are respected among your peers, honored in ritual, empowered in your household. But beneath it all lies a truth you cannot escape. Your freedom is built upon another's chains. Every olive pressed, every grain harvested, every cloak woven each carries the shadow of the helots who toiled unseen. Thus, the life of a Spartan woman cannot be told without them. They were the silent majority of the land, the foundation of Sparta's wealth and power. And while you held your head high, proud of your city and its warriors, deep within you might have known that the ground beneath your feet was never entirely firm. For it was built not only on the strength of Sparta, but also on the suffering of those who had no voice. Imagine yourself not as the youthful Spartan girl running across the training ground, nor the strong wife urging your sons to battle, but as an older woman. Your hair is streaked with silver, your back slightly bent from years of managing estates, bearing children, and carrying responsibilities that men were too often absent to shoulder. What did it mean to grow old in Sparta, especially for women whose lives were measured in strength, property, and the roles they fulfilled for their city? In many Greek cities, aging women were pushed into obscurity, their voices silenced, their presence confined to domestic spaces. But in Sparta, growing old carried a different texture. Age was not necessarily weakness. If anything, older Spartan women often became more visible, more outspoken, and more powerful. This stemmed from the unusual way Spartan society valued them not as fragile beings, but as mothers of warriors, managers of wealth, and guardians of tradition. Widowhood was common. Spartan men lived perilous lives, constantly in training or at war. Death in battle was not only expected but honored. If your husband fell in combat, you did not wear black or retreat into mourning, as Athenian widows might. Instead, you were expected to show pride, to hold your head high, and to remind your children that their father had died as a true Spartan. Your grief was real, but it was private. Publicly, you embodied strength. To weep openly for a husband slain in war was seen as dishonor. Instead, you might quietly pray, offer at the family shrine, or whisper your sorrow in the night when no one could see. Widowhood often expanded a woman's independence. Because property could pass through women, widows sometimes became significant landowners. You might control estates outright, directing helots, hiring overseers, and negotiating with allies. This gave elderly women in Sparta an influence rare in the ancient world. Travelers like Aristotle and others remarked on the wealth held by Spartan women, noting with surprise that they controlled nearly half the land. Though he criticized it as excessive, for women themselves it meant authority, respect, and stability in later years. As an older woman, your place in the household shifted. You were not merely a caretaker of children but a matriarch whose wisdom carried weight. Younger women might seek your guidance on childbirth, estate management, or rituals. Daughters-in-law could defer to your authority, even as they began raising the next generation. Your voice grew louder in family councils, and your presence at festivals was marked with reverence. The body, however, did not escape time. Spartan ideals of strength and beauty emphasized physical fitness in youth. You might remember running races, lifting weights, even wrestling as a girl. But as years passed, muscles softened, and joints itched. The once athletic figure of youth gave way to the slower pace of age. Yet unlike in Athens, where a woman's aging body often condemned her to invisibility, in Sparta age itself carried honor. Wrinkles and gray hair were symbols of endurance, of battles fought not on the field but in the home, the farm, and the heart. The role of grandmother held its own significance. To cradle your grandchild, to tell them tales of heroes and ancestors, was a quiet joy amidst a city that demanded constant hardness. You might sing lullabies that echoed older Spartan hymns, mixing stern wisdom with gentle affection. And when your grandsons marched off to the agoge, you were the one who whispered to them that famous command, "Return with your shield, or upon it." Those words were centuries old, spoken by mothers and grandmothers before you, binding the generations together. Older women also held roles in religion. They might lead prayers, tend shrines, or participate in the chores that sang hymns to Artemis or Thea or Helen of Sparta. In song and ritual, the community saw not youth alone but the steady presence of elders whose voices carried history. Religion offered women an arena of authority that grew with age, for priestesses and ritual leaders were often drawn from respected older women. Widowhood also shaped the lives of Spartan women differently depending on wealth. For poor women, life in later years could be harder, the absence of a husband's labor or support more keenly felt. Yet the communal nature of Sparta's emphasis on shared training, shared meals, shared values meant you were rarely completely alone. Kinship networks, female friendships, and the broader Spartan system supported you, even if austerely. And yet, with age came new anxieties. Would your sons survive war? Would your daughters find good marriages? Would your estate remain intact? The power Spartan women held could also bring criticism. Philosophers like Aristotle condemned the freedom of Spartan women, seeing it as a corruption of society. In his view, women had too much influence, and their voices in politics and economics undermined men. As an older Spartan woman, you might not care what Athenian philosophers thought, but you would know that your power was unusual, perhaps even precarious. Social expectation remained stern. Even in age, you were to embody discipline and control. To gossip, to wail in public, to show weakness, these were unworthy of a Spartan matron. You carried yourself with the same pride that marked your youth, standing tall even if your body stooped. The city demanded it of you, and you demanded it of yourself. Death itself carried meaning. For Spartan men, dying in battle was the highest honor. For women, dying in childbirth was the only death considered equally glorious. As an older woman, you may have escaped that fate, but you carried its shadow in memory. Friends or kin who did not survive labor. Your own aging body was testimony to survival, resilience, and the continuity of life through hardship. And when your time finally came, your funeral was marked with simplicity. Unlike elsewhere in Greece, Spartan women's names could be inscribed on their tombstones, but only if they had died in childbirth or if a man had died in battle. Otherwise, graves were plain, unadorned, reflecting the austerity of Sparta. You might rest beneath a modest marker, your legacy carried not in stone but in the children and grandchildren who remembered your strength. To imagine yourself in these later years is to sense a quiet dignity. You are no longer the girl training on the sands, no longer the bride awaiting her warrior husband. You are the elder matron, the property holder, the grandmother, the voice of tradition. Your wrinkles tell stories, your silence carries weight, your presence commands respect. Though Sparta itself may one day fade, your memory will live in the voices of those who continue to speak the words you once spoke, and in the pride with which you live your life invent, unbroken, and distinctly Spartan. Now imagine yourself living not in the height of Sparta's glory but in its twilight. You are still a Spartan woman, but the city around you no longer resounds with the steady rhythm of training feet on the sand. The rigid structures that shaped your youth, the eggage for boys, the communal meals, the endless drills are starting to crumble. What was it like to be a woman in Sparta when decline set in, when the world changed, and your city began to fade? The golden age of Sparta, that proud city of warriors, began to dim after the long wars with Athens and the costly conflicts that followed. Men who once trained constantly for war now struggled with wealth, luxury, and division. As foreign influence seeped in, so did change. And women, always central in this society, felt the shift keenly. Spartan women had long been known for their freedom, their sharp tongues, and their control of wealth. Aristotle himself scolded Sparta, saying women owned too much land, that their voices carried too far. In the era of decline, this became both a strength and a source of tension. As men fell in number, killed in wars, reduced by strict citizenship laws, the estates of Sparta increasingly fell into women's hands. By some accounts, women controlled nearly 2/3 of the property. To outsiders, this seemed shocking. To you, it was simply the continuation of your duty, to manage, to preserve, to ensure your family survives. Yet the decline of Sparta meant your role was tinged with anxiety. Wealth did not always bring security. Foreigners and mercenaries began to rise in influence. The once proud system of equality among Spartan men faltered, as a few grew very rich and many more fell into poverty. The city that had scorned gold now bent under its weight. As a woman, you saw the shift in your own household. Where once your husband, sons, or brothers dined in the mess halls, now some were excluded for lack of means. Where once the strength of Sparta lay in unity, now it fractured. For women, this fracture was deeply personal. You were accustomed to raising sons for battle, but in later generations, fewer boys passed through the eggage. The training was softened, shortened, sometimes even abandoned. Could you still tell your grandsons to return with their shields, or upon them, if the city itself no longer held to its old ways? The values that shaped your youth felt less secure. You carried the traditions, but the world around you shifted beneath your feet. The role of women in decline was also political, though not formally. Spartan women were never citizens in the same way as men, but their voices mattered. They urged reforms, resisted foreign influence, and reminded men of their heritage. Some accounts even suggest that women mocked men who failed to live up to their warrior ideals, using shame as a weapon to recall them to discipline. In a city fraying at the edges, your sharp tongue was one of the last defenses against dishonor. Yet decline also brought vulnerability. Sparta faced defeats it once thought impossible. The Battle of Leuctra in 371 days shattered the illusion of invincibility. For the first time, Spartan hull plates were broken on the field by the bent spears. As a woman, you may have waited at home for news, only to hear of loss upon loss. Sons who once would have marched in triumph returned in defeat or did not return at all. The proud city, once unbowed, was humbled. And you, like every woman, bore the weight of that sorrow. Foreign influence grew heavier. Sparta, once close to outsiders, now found merchants, travelers, even rulers from abroad shaping its fate. As wealth concentrated in fewer hands, the simplicity of your upbringing gave way to displays of luxury. You may have seen women around you adopt softer lives, finer clothes, foreign ornaments, indulgences that would have shocked your mother or grandmother. Did you resist, clinging to the old ways? Or did you too find comfort in these luxuries, wary of a lifetime of austerity? Your religious role also shifted in decline. Festivals and rituals, once fierce expressions of unity, became fewer, smaller, less binding. Yet women often kept them alive, tending shrines, leading chants, carrying on traditions even as the city's walls weakened. In you and others like you, the memory of Sparta lived, carried not in swords but in stories, not in bronze shields but in whispered prayers. As decline deepened, some Spartan women gained renown beyond their city. Queens like Aegiatis, widow of King Agesiv, played roles in reform movements, urging change to revive Sparta's old strength. Women became symbols of both what had been lost and what might yet be restored. To live in this time was to walk between pride and fear, pride in what your ancestors had built, fear that it was slipping away forever. Old age and a declining Sparta may have carried a new bitterness. Where once you urged sons to glory, you now worried for their survival in a weakened state. Where once you managed estates with confidence, you now feared confiscation or ruin. Where once you carried yourself with the pride of a citizen's wife, you now endured the sneers of outsiders who saw Sparta as a fading shadow of its past. And yet, through it all, you endured. Spartan women had always been the backbone of the city. If men fell in war, it was women who held the households together. If the system crumbled, it was women who kept its memory alive. Even in decline, you stood as a pillar. Your voice, sharp and strong, reminded your children of what Sparta once was and what it could still be, if only courage remained. In the end, the decline of Sparta was not just the story of men losing battles. It was also the story of women carrying on amidst defeat, of mothers and grandmothers who refused to let the spirit of their people die. To imagine yourself in these last days is to stand at the edge of history, holding a fading torch, aware that darkness may come, but also aware that the flame is still in your hands. Now, as we come to the end of this journey, imagine yourself not as a Spartan woman living in the ancient city, but as one looking back across centuries. What remains of your life, your voice, your role? How have others remembered you? What is the legacy of Spartan women through history? From the very beginning, outsiders marveled at you. To Athenians, your strength was shocking, even scandalous. They whispered in disbelief at your freedom, your boldness, your training alongside men. To philosophers like Aristotle, you were a danger, too powerful, too wealthy, too free. To poets, you were strange and sometimes admirable, a mystery within Greece itself. The legacy of Spartan women was therefore both admired and feared. Over time, stories of your life became symbols. When people wanted to speak of courage, they repeated the tale of the Spartan mother who handed her son his shield, saying, "With it or on it." That phrase outlived Sparta itself, echoing down the centuries as a testament to a mother's unyielding devotion to honor. When people wanted to speak of discipline, they remembered the girls who ran, wrestled, and sang in public, building bodies as strong as their wills. And yet, history is never simple. The legacy of Spartan women is not only one of admiration. Some saw in you a warning, a reminder of what happens when women hold too much power. Others use you as a contrast, pointing to Athens or Rome as the proper way for women to live, bound to the home. Your freedom was too much for many to accept, and so the memory of you became contested, both celebrated and condemned. But across time, it was impossible to ignore the uniqueness of your life. Women in most of the ancient world lived quietly in the shadows, their names rarely recorded. Spartan women, by contrast, were remembered. Your voices appeared in anecdotes, sharp and witty. You mocked cowardice. You demanded bravery. You spoke with authority. That legacy of women who dared to speak is rare, and it endures. In the modern world, the image of the Spartan woman has taken on new meanings. For some, you are a symbol of feminism before its time, a woman strong, independent, unafraid to challenge men. For others, you represent the dangers of a society built on extremes, freedom for some, oppression for others, especially the helots who lived as enslaved laborers. Your legacy is therefore complex, woven with both pride and shadow. But beyond politics, there is something more personal. The memory of Spartan women has survived because it resonates with something deep and timeless, the courage of mothers, the endurance of wives, the sharpness of grandmothers, the quiet strength of women who hold societies together. You did not write books. You did not lead armies. And yet, your presence was so strong that it echoed across history, leaving a mark few others did. Think of it this way, even after Sparta itself crumbled, your reputation lived on. Travelers who visited the ruins centuries later still spoke of the women who once ran freely in the fields, who spoke their minds without fear, who owned lands and estates when others could not. You became, in memory, larger-than-life a reminder of what women could be when given freedom and responsibility. And so, what is your legacy today? It is the lesson that women, even in the harshest societies, can wield power. It is the truth that courage belongs not only to warriors in armor, but also to the mothers who raised them. It is the enduring memory of laughter in the gymnasium, of footsteps on dusty training fields, of sharp words spoken in defense of honor. It is a legacy that whispers across time, women matter, women endure, women shape the fate of nations. As you drift now into rest, imagine yourself walking once more through the streets of ancient Sparta. You see the tall stone buildings, the training fields, the shrines. You hear the echo of songs sung by maidens, the clash of shields, the laughter of women gathered in the sunlight. It is a city both harsh and proud, and you are at its heart. You may not have thought of yourself as leaving a legacy. You may have lived simply managing fields, raising children, enduring sorrows. But history has remembered you. And in that memory lies your true immortality. So let the world say what it will, praise or scorn, admiration or suspicion. You lived as a Spartan woman. You were strong, unyielding, free in ways that others could barely imagine. And centuries later, your voice still carries. That is your legacy. Now, as this story draws to a close, rest gently. Picture yourself sitting on a hill above the Eurotas River, the sun setting over the Taygetus Mountains, the fields golden in the fading light. You hold the memories of generations in your heart. You are the mother, the daughter, the wife, the grandmother. You are Sparta. And, as night falls, your story lingers like a quiet song carried on the evening wind. Strong. Enduring. Eternal.